Thank you. Our next speaker is Alain Bertaud. Alain is a senior research scholar at the Marron Institute and is the author of Order Without Design: How Markets Shape Cities. He was previously the principal urban planner at the World Bank and has worked as a resident urban planner in Bangkok, San Salvador, Port-au-Prince, Sanaa, New York, Paris, Tlemcen, and Chandigarh.
I am very grateful for this presentation on Shenzhen. I have to confess something. Shenzhen is part of one of the biggest skeletons in my closet. When I visited Shenzhen the first time in '83, and they have requested the assistance of the World Bank to develop infrastructure. At the time, the population was around 300,000, 350 maybe, and they asked, when I visited, they have produced a master plan for a city of, if I remember well, 5 million.
At first they wanted a city of 1 million.
Yeah, but at the time, they wanted infrastructure financing for, maybe it was 3 million or 5 million, I forgot now, and I got cold feet, because as it looked, there were a lot of villages. You could not see very much. I mean, I could see a potential. The location was fantastic. There was a possibility of a deep fort. So I chickened out because for the World Bank, when you do operation, one of the key factors is disbursement. If you plan an investment for 3 million, and after 10 years you have only 1 million, you are going to look bad. This money is committed, it's not bringing interest. So I say, I'm sorry, if you come down with a smaller plan, we could consider it, but I couldn't see myself going to the board with a city that will mean a yearly growth of 10% a year, which is just not. So this is to also, I'm very glad of this presentation because after I visited Shenzhen several times, but as a visitor, unfortunately, not as an actor, and for instance, when I wanted to have an haircut, I would go to a village. So I could see also the spontaneous access, so the spontaneous growth that happened not only in Shenzhen, actually, all over China, with a township and village enterprise too. You didn't mention that, but I think they were important also. So again, this idea that everything came from central planning is absolutely not true. It came from the spirit of initiative of the Chinese people, the courage they have and the tenacity they have. So let's start with my presentation now. This is the plan I will follow. I would start with reminding that city has primarily labor markets. I think Patrick has already developed a bit this aspect, but so I'm going to look at new cities from the point of view of the development of labor markets. I would like also briefly to look at the historical record of new cities in the 20th century and the impact they had, or what was then I will try to talk why create new cities in the 21st century. That will overlap. I will go briefly over that because I think it overlaps with some previous presentation. And then finally, I would like to discuss major challenges for new cities. So first, cities are primarily labor market. People are the most important component in cities. If people move to cities, it's because the quality of the people and the enterprise which are already there. It is not because the sewer system is very efficient or because transport is very fast. It's possible that you have efficient transport and infrastructure in existing cities, but the main attraction of a city are the people who are already there. And city developed when migrants are attracted by the people who are there. most cities have grown spontaneously around villages, villages which had a specific location advantage, a comparative advantage. For instance, say, why New York grew more than Baltimore or, or Boston, for instance. It was suddenly a comparative advantage in location because of the Erie Canal, I believe. Because the port of Baltimore is probably even slightly better, or even of Boston, than the one of New York. So the successful cities are sustained by large integrated labor markets. Again, some of my previous speakers have been speaking about that. It's not enough to have a lot of population. For instance, in some part of Bangladesh, rural Bangladesh or China, you have densities which are higher than Los Angeles. But it doesn't mean that they have the productivity of Los Angeles, because there is no infrastructure which connects the people together. So there are a lot of people in the same place, but they are not connected. What makes a city productive is a face-to-face meetings of different people with different skills and different opinions. So this should not arise in a rural area where basically every farmer stay in his village and know only the people and trade only with people in his village. So this is really, what successful cities are all about. The larger labor market, but integrated labor market, the more successful and innovative is the city, in spite of the congestion and the difficulties. For instance, when you visit a city like Bangkok or Jakarta, you wonder how can people be productive when you see, the difficulty created by congestion. But if you look at the numbers, you will see that people in Jakarta are more productive than people in Bandung. And when you visit Bandung, you feel, well, this is a beautiful city. It's nice. You circulate much easier there than in Jakarta. But in fact, the people at Jakarta are more productive because they have the opportunity to meet with much more other people and trade much more. So this is really, the idea of successful cities. So after that, let us look at new cities. So you see immediately, if you accept my premises, then creating new cities is a fantastic challenge because you start with no labor market. You start with 0 person, 0 enterprise. So who are the first 1,000 people who will take the risk to go in the middle of nowhere? So that's really one of the things. And this is why in the 20th century, in the 20th century, if you look at the most effective, the cities which have grown the most were in fact new cities, but created as capitals. For what reason? Well, the labor market is easy in a new capital. The civil servants are obliged to move. For instance, in Brazil, when the capital moved from Rio de Janeiro to Brasilia, all the civil servants have to move. They didn't have a choice if they wanted to keep their job. So here you have a captive labor market. And of course, if you are, like Brasilia, the capital of a large country like Brazil, you have a lot of consultants and services who serve the government who are obliged to follow. Whether they like it or not, they're obliged to follow. So that explains why most of the cities which grew the largest in the 20th century were mostly cities created by government. So, and also they solved the problem of the cash flow because the financial of the infrastructure was paid by all the taxpayer of the entire country and not only of the locals, which again would be a challenge for new cities. Now, there were a number of new towns, which didn't grow that much, but most of them were really not new town, but extension of existing city. So with a slightly different design. So Levittown, Radburn, Columbia, Reston, Syringe, Prospect, they attract, they were probably innovative design, but not really a new city. They piggyback on all the infrastructure, including, by the way, the airport, but also the sewer system and the transport system of existing city. So again, here, these were interesting development, but mostly, urban design in their, let's say their attraction with slightly better urban design. And then one exception, of course, is Shenzhen. Shenzhen, the first time a free labor market was created and a free real estate market. Real estate market didn't exist in China before Shenzhen. Every enterprise has to provide housing for their worker, Denway housing, and the enterprise who didn't, then it was a municipality who provided housing. There was no private housing at all. So Shenzhen created, and they could do that because, of course, the proximity of Hong Kong, where you had the expertise to create, especially real estate development. In China at the time, many enterprises, let's say an enterprise producing bicycles, were more busy running the real estate assets that they had than making enterprise, because as a factory age, they were a retired worker. You cannot kick out a retired worker for their house provided by the income, by the enterprise. Therefore, you had to build more housing for your workers plus the retired people. So you ended up with company where really mostly managing real estate rather than producing bicycle or gizmo or whatever. And I think that the Chinese were well aware, again, that if their economy was get out of poverty, as Dr. Du described, the country was at the time very poor, the only way was to free the enterprise from the burden of their real estate assets and create enterprise who will do just real estate. So Shenzhen, again, was an exception because it was not a capital city, and as Dr. Du say, it really created its infrastructure by itself, unsuccessfully asking the World Bank to finance it. Okay. So we share a skeleton there. Good. With Singapore. I'm glad. Sorry. So why create new cities in the 21st century? So I think there are two trends now. If I look at all the new cities, which appear in the press, I will not talk necessarily of the one, promoted by our former president. But so there are two motivations. One is new improved institution, and that was, of course, the idea of Charter City, the first TED Talk of Paul some years ago, that it's difficult to change the institution of existing cities. So, and let's say the dead weight of obsolete institution is very expensive for cities. Therefore, it's rather logical to say, well, let us start from scratch. So that I think is a number of new cities are built around this idea of new improved institution, which, by the way, is a direct continuation of the cities created in the 19th century and mostly in the United States around morality or religion or something like that. Like in particular the descendant of there are some ideas about communal living and things like that, which were, and none of them, by the way, were very successful. They didn't expand very much. Salt Lake City did. Yes, that's right. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that. Let's say religious. Sorry, I would put a difference with based on religious. Let's say creation, but again here based also on the. On the spirit of enterprise of the moment, not only the Mormon Church, I think. Anyway, sorry, I've been pushing these things. So, and then I think that we see much more cities which are in fact promoting what they call efficient greens technology or efficient technology, which are, by the way, usually not technology which has been tested, but they say that it's going to be like that in the new city. For instance, one big example is NEOM in Saudi Arabia. It's a monster in a certain way, and it promised. It says that you could go from one side of the city to the other, 175 kilometers, yes, in 20 minutes, which is, by the way, even with a maglev will be impossible because you will have to stop on the way sometime. And nobody moved to a city because you can go from one side of the city to the other in 15 minutes. It's a bit like if you were telling somebody, you could go from Fort Lauderdale to another city in Florida in 20 minutes. Are you going to move to Fort Lauderdale because of that? That's not. You don't move to a city because the sewer is fantastically efficient or the garbage. You move to another city because of the people who are there and the enterprise that are there. So we have a number of this so-called efficient technology. They try to attract people by strange design, I would say. So NEOM, this is a linear city of 160. They say that it's going to be a slab like that of 500 meter high. This is 200 meter more than the Eiffel Tower in one building. So again here, there is no room for the urban villages, no room for a barbershop to settle somewhere. Where do they settle? Or will the barbershop be designed in advance the way it was designed in the time of the Soviet Union, where you had a barbershop and the barbers inside? Then Telosa, designed by BIG, Bjorn Ingel group. Again, I don't know, would you move to a city when you look at the design like that? What does it provide? What is it? What problem does it solve? Except, the ego of the architect, frankly. I'm an architect, I know what it is. Then there's the floating cities. So the floating cities have been also promoted, by the way, by the UN Habitat for some reason. I know Oceanics, one of the guys who developed, the company would develop some part of the technology, and he's a very serious guy. And he's, he looked at all the condition of the ocean on the sea, and he realized that there are very, very few areas of the world where you could have a floating city without, being washed out by hurricane, cyclone, typhoon, or other things. And so there are some areas, for instance, the Persian Gulf. There are some area around the equator where you have no hurricane, but it's very limited. And then, of course, when they come out with a design like that, nobody recognizes city here. City is a labor market. How do you move from one part of another like that? Well, you could move by sea, but let's say, again here, expansion is very limited. You cannot grow it high. So I'm not saying that in some area that not might be a solution, but for the expansion of a neighborhood, maybe, which instead of being flooded, then you could have that. But this is not a solution for a large population of the world. I would see that more as a kind of a Club Med, a floating Club Med, which will certainly solve the problem of the location of some Club Med. So now we are left with the major challenge for new cities. So how do you create enough people to constitute a viable labor market? And the labor market has to be large. So if a city remain at 20,000 people, it's not, probably a small town of 20, 30, 40,000 would be already more efficient. So how do you pass this growth threshold where the labor market is large enough to provide, if you move there, what you will want as a migrant is also different opportunity of employment. You want to change jobs, especially if you move to a new city, probably you are not an old guy like me, you are a younger person, and you will want to change job within your career. You don't want to spend all your time in the same job. So if the city have only few employers, or let's say a labor market of 20,000 people, that will limit your possibility very much. So I think this is how to attract people and a variety of people. During the pandemic, we start distinguishing people between indispensable workers and dispensable workers. Now, the indispensable workers were not the fantastic neurologists or people like Elon Musk. They were people who were driving trucks. They were the people who in the hospital knew how to connect the oxygen to the different room. Those were indispensable workers. And I think that, again, if you have a new city, you have to attract all sorts of people. You cannot attract just an elite. And I think that when you show, in fact, new cities for an elite, this was an enclave. It was not a new city. Or then, like in Chandigarh, when I used to work there in 1963, let's say the enclave. In fact, Chandigarh, yes, was an enclave, and the real city was a slum around it, which were the people were building Chandigarh. So again, you cannot have really a new city isolated, which is only for the elite. You will have to cater for all the services, and the elite require a lot of services. So then there's also another aspect, and again, my experience with the bank there, with the World Bank, was, we finance in China in particular a lot of new economic zone, and which included, of course, housing, and in Sichuan in particular. And one of the main constraints there was the cash flow. It's when you project a new city or a new neighborhood even of, say, 100,000 people, you have to build a sewer system in advance. You have to build schools in advance. People will not move if there are no schools. And so you have an enormous expenditure up front, and you start getting revenue only when the people are moving in by selling land, or in the case of China, selling the right to build, the land use rights rather than land itself. And so you end up with long negative cash flow. If a government is behind you, there's no problem. Again, the government have a soft budget constraint historically. But if you are dependent on venture capital, the venture capitalists may get cold feet. If your negative cash flow lasts a little longer than was planned, that was again the reason of my caution with Shenzhen. I could see a long negative cash flow and having to bear the burden of that during my career at the World Bank. So again here, I think these are the two major things that have to be overcome when you plan a new city. Again, I completely understand the attraction of having a new city built on completely new institution, especially doing away with absurd zoning regulation and process like that. I completely understand it. But on the other hand, how do you start? How do you attract people fast enough? And that, I think, is... and attracting people fast enough is, of course, completely linked also to the cash flow, the financial thing. So thank you very much. Thank you.